At 24, Jake Carter believed prison was something that happened to other people. He was an American from Cleveland, Ohio, a former delivery driver with no clear plan, too much confidence, and a growing belief that an ordinary life was a kind of failure. Then he bought a one-way ticket to Europe. Less than a year later, he was standing inside a prison in southern Italy, surrounded by voices he barely understood, wondering how a handful of fast decisions had carried him thousands of miles from home. The moment he remembered most clearly was not the arrest. It was the first night in his cell. A steel door closed behind him, the lock turned, and the sound seemed to continue long after the guard had walked away. Jake sat on the edge of a narrow bed while two strangers watched him in silence. For the first time, there was nobody left to impress and no excuse left to repeat. There was only time, and he had years of it ahead. Jake had not grown up dreaming of becoming a criminal. In Cleveland, he had been an average student and an unreliable employee. He moved between warehouse shifts, delivery work, and short-term construction jobs. Whenever something became difficult, he left before it could prove that he was not as capable as he pretended to be. His friends called him restless. His mother called him impatient. Jake preferred to say he was waiting for the right opportunity. Online, he watched people his age travel, buy expensive clothes, and speak as if success had arrived overnight. He rarely considered what might be hidden outside the camera frame. He only saw that other lives looked larger than his own. When a delivery company reduced his hours, Jake treated it as a final insult. He sold his car, used most of his savings for a plane ticket, and announced that he was going to Europe to start over. His mother asked what kind of work he planned to do. Jake said he would figure it out when he arrived. She asked how long he intended to stay. He said he did not know. At the airport, she hugged him and told him that changing countries would not automatically change his habits. Jake smiled as if the warning belonged to someone else. For the first few weeks, the trip looked harmless. Jake stayed in Rome, worked irregular shifts washing dishes, and shared a crowded apartment with travelers and seasonal workers. He learned enough Italian to order food, ask for directions, and understand when a manager was telling him that there would be no work the next day. The city was beautiful, but beauty did not pay rent. His savings disappeared faster than he expected. He moved north after hearing that temporary work was easier to find around Milan. There, loneliness became its own kind of pressure. Jake had no family nearby, no close friends, and no reputation to protect. He could introduce himself as anyone he wanted. That freedom felt exciting until he realized that nobody would notice if he made a terrible decision. At a small cafe, he met a man named Luca who spoke fluent English and seemed interested in Jake's story. Luca paid for dinner, introduced him to several friends, and never appeared worried about money. The group described itself as a network of traders and resellers. Their explanations were vague, but Jake was more interested in the cash on the table than in the details they avoided. The first request sounded unimportant. They wanted Jake to accompany them on a late-night trip and help with a simple task away from the actual theft. No one described it as a robbery. They called it an opportunity, then a favor, then a test. Jake understood enough to know that it was illegal. He also understood that saying yes would earn him more in one night than he usually made in a month. When it was over, Jake's hands were shaking. The others laughed, ordered food, and behaved as if nothing unusual had happened. That calmness reassured him. He told himself that he had not entered a store, threatened anyone, or taken the goods himself. The money in his pocket made every excuse sound reasonable. Crossing the line, one job became several. The group moved between cities in northern and central Italy, and Jake accepted a larger role each time. Valuable merchandise disappeared from shops and storage rooms. Business owners arrived to find damage, missing stock, and frightened employees. Jake tried not to imagine those people. In his version of the story, only insurance companies lost money. The lifestyle was less glamorous than he had expected. Most days involved waiting in cheap apartments, eating convenience store meals, and listening to arguments he could not fully understand. Nobody trusted anyone. Phones were changed, plans shifted, and friends disappeared without explanation. The group could laugh together at dinner and accuse one another of betrayal an hour later. Still, Jake liked the feeling of being included. He bought clothes he could not explain to his family and moved into a better room. During video calls, he positioned the camera carefully so his mother would not see anything expensive in the background. He said he had found work in shipping. She wanted to believe him, so she did not ask many questions. With every successful job, Jake's fear became quieter. That was the most dangerous change. He did not become braver or smarter, he simply became familiar with risk. The first time, he could barely sleep. Months later, he could eat breakfast and discuss another job, as if they were planning a road trip. There were warnings. A man Jake knew was suddenly arrested in Bologna. Another member of the group stopped answering messages. Luca began checking the street whenever a car slowed near their building. Jake noticed all of it, but easy money had already changed the way he calculated danger. He no longer asked whether the next job was safe. He asked whether the reward was large enough to justify his fear. The last job, the illusion, ended in Venice. From the beginning, the plan felt wrong. One person failed to arrive. Luca was more nervous than usual. A disagreement broke out, and Jake had several chances to leave. He even walked toward a train station before turning around. Later, he would think about that decision more than any other. The door to his old life was still open, and he chose not to walk through it. Police were already watching the area. Before the group could complete what it had started, officers moved in and nearby streets were blocked. Jake ran for less than a minute. He did not know the city well enough to find an escape, and panic erased whatever judgment he had left. When an officer ordered him to stop, he finally did. On the ground, with his hands visible and his cheek against cold pavement, Jake repeated the only thought he could form. This was not supposed to happen. For months, he had treated arrest as a distant possibility, almost a story told to frighten beginners. Now strangers were searching his pockets, reading his name from his passport, and placing him inside a police vehicle. At the station, Jake kept saying, "I'm an American citizen." He expected the sentence to create a special exit. It did not. A consular official later explained that the embassy could help him contact family and understand the process, but it could not cancel Italian law. His passport could identify him. It could not erase what he had done. Jake spent months in custody while investigators connected him to the group's activities. An interpreter helped him follow meetings with his lawyer, but legal language was difficult, even in English. He heard dates, city names, witness statements, and evidence presented in a careful order. Each detail removed another piece of the story he had told himself, the story in which he was only standing nearby. Some defendants blamed one another, others said almost nothing. Jake considered doing the same, but silence did not change the evidence. The court did not see a confused traveller who had made one mistake. It saw a man who had repeatedly chosen to participate. When the sentence was announced, the number seemed unreal. Several years in an Italian prison. Jake looked at his lawyer, waiting for a correction that never came. He thought about his mother, hearing the news from thousands of miles away. He thought about the money he had already spent. The so-called easy money was gone, but the price had only begun. South to Calabria, Jake expected to remain near Venice while he served his sentence. Instead, he was assigned to a facility in Calabria, far to the south. The transfer began before sunrise. He travelled under guard with other prisoners, watching highways, hills, and unfamiliar towns pass through reinforced glass. The farther the vehicle moved, the more distant America felt. Calabria was a place Jake knew only from the bottom of a map. The prison stood away from the tourist version of Italy he had imagined. Before his flight from Cleveland, its walls were faded by sun and weather. Cameras covered the entrances. Gates opened one at a time, and every gate closed before the next one moved. During intake, officers recorded his information, inspected his belongings, and gave him basic prison clothing. Instructions came quickly in Italian. Jake understood only fragments. Whenever he hesitated, someone repeated the same words more loudly, as if volume could replace translation. His first cell was narrow and plain. 3 beds, a small table, a metal sink, shelves crowded with personal items, and a window positioned too high to see through. One cellmate, Nabil, spoke some English. The other, Pietro, communicated with Jake, mostly through gestures. Neither man asked for his entire story. They watched whether he kept the shared space clean, respected their belongings, and created unnecessary problems. That first night, Jake discovered how loud a prison could be. Metal doors struck their frames. Voices travelled through corridors. Someone called to a prisoner on another floor. A television played behind a wall. Then, without warning, the building became quiet. The silence was worse. It left Jake alone with every decision that had brought him there. Learning the routine. Prison life was not a continuous fight. It was repetition. Doors opened, doors closed, meals arrived, names were called. Prisoners waited to shower, waited for exercise time, waited for appointments, and waited for news from home. A single morning could feel endless, yet entire months disappeared without leaving a clear memory. The tension came from never fully relaxing. Jake had to learn rules nobody wrote down for him. Do not borrow what you cannot return. Do not touch another person's food. Do not turn a small disagreement into a performance for the entire corridor. Pay attention to tone, because a sentence can mean something different when neither person speaks the other's language well. During his first week, Jake sat in a chair that another prisoner used every day. The mistake was minor, but the reaction was immediate. Voices rose, other inmates gathered, and Jake realized how quickly boredom could turn a small problem into public entertainment. Nabil stepped between them, explained that Jake was new, and the moment passed. Jake spent the rest of the evening thinking about how little control he had over what happened around him. The prison held men from different parts of Italy and from countries across Europe and North Africa. Some were serving short sentences, others spoke as if they might never leave. Groups formed around language, region, family connections, and old loyalties. Jake belonged nowhere. At first, that made him vulnerable. Later, he understood that staying neutral could also protect him from conflicts that were not his. He learned Italian one practical word at a time. Wait, food, shower, lawyer, letter, tomorrow. Tomorrow became the word he heard most often. Requests would be answered tomorrow. A promised call might happen tomorrow. A document could arrive tomorrow. In prison, tomorrow was both hope and delay. The cost of easy money. The hardest moments were the phone calls home. Jake rehearsed what he wanted to say, but the timer made every conversation feel unfinished. His mother never shouted. Her disappointment was quieter than anger, and that made it worse. Jake had left America saying he wanted freedom. Now each call ended because a recorded voice ordered him to hang up. At first, he blamed Luca, the police, his lawyer, and the language barrier. He blamed everyone except the person who had repeatedly said yes. Anger gave him energy, but it did not move the calendar. Weeks passed, then months. The outside world continued without him. A cousin got married, a friend had a child. The apartment building where Jake had lived changed owners. Life was not waiting for his release. A confrontation elsewhere in the facility led to a lockdown that lasted several days. Jake was not involved, but he lost exercise time, calls, and access to regular activities. That was another lesson. Inside prison, someone else's decision could change your entire week. He had once believed he controlled every risk he took. Now even innocent choices belonged to a system larger than him. Months passed before he stopped treating responsibility as surrender. He joined an Italian language class, accepted work in the prison kitchen, and began reading whatever English books he could find. The kitchen was hot, repetitive, and closely supervised, but it gave structure to his days. For the first time in years, Jake completed the same job consistently without searching for a shortcut. An older inmate named Salvatore sometimes helped him practice Italian. Salvatore had spent much of his adult life entering and leaving institutions. One afternoon, he told Jake, "Prison can waste your time, or it can show you how much time you were already wasting." Jake remembered the sentence because it was not comforting. It placed the next decision back in his hands. Jake began writing longer letters to his mother. He stopped describing himself as unlucky. He admitted that people had been frightened, businesses had been damaged, and trust had been broken. Accepting that truth did not repair the past, but it ended the argument he had been having with reality. Years behind the same door prison changed slowly. New inmates arrived, others were released or transferred. Nabil left one morning with his belongings packed in a plastic bag, and Jake never saw him again. Pietro received bad news from home and became silent for weeks. Jake learned that every person carried a private countdown, but not everyone knew the date at the end of it. Birthdays were the strangest days. Jake could measure exactly how much time had passed, yet he had few memories to separate one year from another. He marked the dates in a notebook and wrote one thing he had learned during the previous year. The list was not impressive. Better Italian, more patience, fewer excuses, but it was honest. He also learned that improvement did not erase consequences. Good behavior could help, but it could not return the years to his family.